Thank you very much for this introduction, Sir, Professor. Thank you to Nilanjan and Nipun, Professor Nilanjan Chakravarti, Nipun Nutan, and all the students who are here. It's a pleasure for me, and also, of course, I'm including the BA students, MA students, who've been attending my workshop for the last now 10 days. It has been, I think, a successful experience so far, and it's only the beginning. Okay. I will divide my presentation into 3 parts. In fact, there will be a small part in which I'm going to explain that workshop that we're doing, because I think it's essential for those who do not know what we're experiencing or experimenting now. It's important for them to know. And the second part, I won't intervene at all because the students will intervene in my place and they will give you a short insight, maybe, or extract of Tagore, the play Tagore, the post office, which it's a work in progress, so we are working on it. I'll explain to you this program. And then the third part, which will be the longer one, will be dedicated to the reception of Tagore in France. Right. If you see this slide, you see Reconnaissance Rabindranath Tagore. I've chosen this title before entering the session more deeply because I think that this is the word that we've got to focus on today and for the next years and probably decades. Reconnaître is a word in French. In it, you've got the word naissance, which means birth, connaître, which means to know, and reconnaître, which means to recognize. So this is our priority today, is to make the young generation know better and recognize Tagore. But of course, in Visva-Bharati, it's something that you do on a regular basis, maybe daily basis. You have an introduction of Tagore, which is regular, and you're very lucky because through Tagore, you've got some visions, some very important notions that are important for the world that we build for the next generations. But in France, it's not exactly the case. So I think that those visions or those precious things that he had to say have to be reborn, born again, or at least accessible or affordable to the common people. So I'm trying to just, maybe I've got to escape. It's okay. Oh, okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So Nipun presented me already. Oh, yeah, still. Nipun presented me already, so there is no need for me to go back to this. But indeed, I had an experience of research that started in 1997 here at Rabindra Bhavan. It lasted it has not finished, in fact, since it gave birth first to a PhD thesis and then to that book which you talked about, and maybe it will be handed around for the next hour. And now it leads me to this program that we are doing, which is basically the translation of the post office of Tagore with students from the CMELLCS, Visva-Bharati, Visva-Bharati, and it started on the 12th of August, no, on the 17th of August, I think, to be precise. The idea is that we would have a translation directly from Bangla. In fact, technically, students are working from Bangla to French directly, and I am working from English to French. Oh, okay, okay, okay. And so this translation should lead to a publication with a new, totally modern new translation, and also a study that I've completed on the reception of that play in France. So it started with the first attempt of André Gide of translating that play in 1914, and goes on until 1961. The second step would be to perform that new play to an audience in Bengal, so certainly in Shantiniketan and Calcutta. This is under construction. We hope that it's going to come true. Also, there are other projects which are basically around the same idea of recognizing Tagore or getting Tagore better known in France, or also the French connection of Tagore and France, more known in India. Now, okay. I'm not going to talk too much on the play Amal et la lettre de roi, which is a translation of The Post Office. But just to remind you, it's quite important to know that this play was quite famous in Paris for, let's say, about 15 years. And it had an impact even for those who did not go to the theater, because it was also broadcast through the wireless. So this had full recognition, not only by the people from Paris, but also from other parts of France. So you can see here some press cuttings, but I'm not going to go too much into details, but you see that there was a wide coverage of that play in France. Now, just to go back to the translation process that we're doing now with the students, we've worked in a way that you needed the Bangla version, the English version, and the French versions. It has been a complete work, step by step, that would lead to debates in the workshop, and also some an accomplishment which will be done within probably 2 months when it will be released. Now, what I'm going to do is to thank the students again. So they are all here, those who participated to the workshop, and I think I forgot some names, so thank you all. Now we will have a short presentation, or not exactly, or we'll have scene 1, act 1, scene 1, or what would have been scene 1, of Amal in French, but the subtitles will be in Bangla, so everyone will be able to follow. Okay, so I'm going to ask the students to come and take the floor instead of me, and then I will have this presentation on the reception of Tagore in France. Press the button. Forget to press. Good.
Madho, cet enfant me cause bien de tourments. Avo, ma pensée était libre comme l'air. Mais depuis quand, venu de nulle part, il entre dans mon cœur. Il n'y a que lui qui compte. Autant dire que si, un jour, il doit s'en aller de cette maison, je n'aurai plus le cœur à y vivre. Dis-moi, Kaviraj, crois-tu qu'il va?
Si tel est son destin, il vivra longtemps. Néanmoins, à en croire les traités de médecins ayurvédiques.
Quoi? Que disent-ils?
Qu'avec le bi et le catalepsie, je cite, vient le foie et la goutte.
Oh, docteur, cédez-moi basiner avec tes interminables traités. Il ne faut qu'accentuer mes angoisses. Dis-moi, plutôt clairement et simplement, ce que je dois faire.
Le patient réclame une attention de tous les instants.
C'est bien bon. Mais encore, explique-moi comment concrètement je dois m'y prendre.
Je te l'ai déjà dit et redit. Sous aucun prétexte, ces garçons ne doivent pointer le nez dehors.
Mais c'est un cas enfant. Le doigt est entre quatre murs. Toute la ceinture ne sera sous simple.
C'est pourtant la chose à faire. Le soleil et le vent d'automne agissent sur lui tel de véritables poisons, car, comme à Athos les traités, occasent de soufflement, de malaise, de hausse de tension et de jaunisse, ou d'effets de paupières.
Pas pitié, car des difficiles traitent pour toi. Si je comprends bien, tu ne vois aucune solution. Si sont de la manière maintenir enfin.
Absolument aucune, car quand viennent le vent et le soleil d'eau.
Que veux-tu que je fasse de tes, quand vient ceci ou cela? Je te conjure, fournis-moi distinctement la démarche à suivre. Ce pauvre enfant souffre le maître sans jamais se plaindre, mais suivre ton traitement est pour lui un supplice. Ça me fend le cœur de le voir grimacer à chaque fois qu'il doit avaler ta maudite potion.
Plus il grimace, plus le remède fait effet. Du reste, comme disait le grand sage Choi-Bono, il en va de même en matière de médicaments que de conseils. Plus ils sont durs à avaler, meilleurs ils sont. Oh là là, par contre, désolé madame, leur tourne et il faut à tout prix que j'aille.
Thank you so much. Yeah. No, it was okay. It was okay. Ooh. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so now it's the presentation on in the Tagore, in the footsteps of Tagore in France. As the title suggests, my aim is to present the links between Tagore and the French intellectuals whom he had the chance to meet or to be acquainted with, as well as the reception of his works from a factual and chronological point of view. But first, let me point out that on the subject of reception, researchers have tended to neglect the lay people. Myself, I am going in a moment to talk about renowned French authors and artists and journalists. However, the hundreds of letters that Tagore's readers sent to him, which are kept at Rabindra Bhavan, prove that in France, between 1913 and 1941, he was not only highly appreciated by the elite, but also loved by the common people. His audience was mixed in terms of gender, social class, and political orientation. He had admirers throughout France, including my region, which is Brittany. I am going to tell you a story which does not prove anything in terms of statistics, It is not scientific because the sample I'm going to use isn't large enough. However, it is emotionally infused, besides being somewhat connected to my personal, let's say, passion for Tagore, and therefore my presence here. It has some connection to reality. L'Offrande lyrique, which was the translation of André Gide of the play of the L'Offrande lyrique, was the translation of Song Offerings Gitanjali. Well, that book was in my both of my grandmother's bookcases. All they knew about that, about India, were some cliches and maybe the names of the former trading posts, the French trading post of Pondichéry, Chandernagore, Yanahomai, and Karikal. And later on, they would know about Mahatma Gandhi, about Jawaharlal Nehru, about Indira Gandhi, and that was almost all, except that one of them could recite one of the poems of Gitanjali by heart. And the second one, when you would show a photograph of Rabindranath, she would be able to give the name of the author without even making a mistake, which no librarian or even academic in France is able to do now. Born in 1920, my younger grandmother came from a fairly off, urban conservative and Catholic bourgeois family. My other grandmother, my eldest grandmother, had illiterate parents. She worked all her life as a hardware saleswoman and had three passions in her life: her family, her hometown in Brittany, Saint-Malo, where you've got very famous authors, by the way, including Chateaubriand, that you can see on the picture there, who is the father of Romanticism in France. And the third passion was poetry. But let's move to facts. Even though he didn't study French, Rabindranath had early access to European culture, English, of course, but also French. The fact that he was born in Calcutta and in Jorashanko played a big part in this. Of course, Calcutta was the administrative capital of the Raj, a cosmopolitan city, a cultural, artistic, educational, and intellectual hub. His family was curious, which means passionate, but also constructively critical about everything that came from Europe. Dwarkanath and Devendranath, both in their own way, contributed to the transmission of multicultural knowledge and a dual culture. Here is what a French journalist called Charles Muller, who visited the Tagores as early as 1911, which was previous to the Nobel Prize, recalled. So here's the part of the quotation, but the quotation is longer. Although Brahmins of high caste, the Tagores do not hesitate to drink tea and enjoy, in the company of Europeans, the small fried bowls made with sugar, condensed milk, and flour that are the specialty of Calcutta. We've all recognized the mishti there. These upper-class bourgeois are in a way the Voltairians of Hindu superstition. Despite the prohibitions, their grandfather had already crossed the seas and traveled to England and France. His descendants still possess the portraits given to him by Queen Victoria and Louis Philippe. On the previous picture, maybe, well, on this one, you will probably notice Goganendranath, okay? You will recognize Goganendranath, Rabi's nephew and member of the Bengali school, whose work were exhibited in Paris in February 1914, just after the Nobel Prize. Some of Bogdandranath's caricatures were influenced by some artists, French artists, and several issues of what we call l'Assiette au beurre are stocked in Rabindranath, just a few meters from here. A bit of time. Okay. Now, as you know, Robbie lost his mother at the age of 13, and therefore his older brothers and sisters played a major role in his education. Should I mention only one of them, it would be Jyotirindranath. Jyotirindranath was a polymath in his own case and own name. He was also a French-speaking linguist. In 1877, he gave Robbie the part of Monsieur Jourdain in an adaptation of Molière's famous comedy, Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. Jyotirindranath translated also Victor Cousin, Victor Cousin was sort of utilitarian, if you wish, who influenced many Brahmos and also Debendranath. He translated also Guy de Maupassant, famous short story writer. And when you know the importance of short stories in Bengal, you may feel that France had an indirect influence on Bengali literature. He also translated Pierre Loti's Land sans les Anglais. Land sans les Anglais means India without the English, an interesting title. That is to mention only a few of the things which he translated, because he also translated the French national anthem, La Marseillaise. In 1915, France was then at war with the Germans, and Jyoti admired the French for what he considered to be their revolutionary mind. Although he had read Molière, Voltaire, Hugo, and Maupassant, Rabindranath's knowledge of French literature was quite incomplete compared to his mastery of English and Indian classics, let alone the Upanishads. One French novel made a deep impression on him, Paul and Virginia. This book was a novel written by Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, who was a botanist, traveler, and anti-racist, anti-slavery writer. Bernardin de Saint-Pierre was also influenced by Daniel Defoe and Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, which was Rabindranath's favorite English novel. Now, maybe you know that place. In 1881, accompanied by Jyotirindranath and Jyotirindranath's late wife, Kadambari, who Tagore held dear in his heart, Rabi stayed at the French trading post of Chandernagore. There, in the house, the yellow house that you can see on the picture, he would observe the activities of the ordinary people, a leisure he had been forbidden behind the walls of Thakurbari in Jorashanko. In Chandernagore, he wrote poems and began his first novel, Thakuranir's Hut, published in 1883. He might have used the port or harbor, small harbor, as the setting for Gatkata, a short story in which the many centuries old Gat expresses himself or itself as the first person narrated. Chandernagore was a trading post, a French trading post, so you had a French presence there. At the age of 18, in Bengal, no, I forgot something. Yeah. Before that, having studied in England for a year, Rabindranath made a short visit to Paris in the early autumn of 1878. He made a second one in September 1890 when he toured the Eiffel Tower, inaugurated a year earlier at the Universal Exhibition. Here is the postcard he sent to his wife, Rennes. So you can see here a postcard sent by Tagore to his wife. At the age of 50, in Bengal, Tagore enjoyed a remarkable reputation and a popularity as a poet, comedy writer, polemical columnist, and essayist. In January 1912, he met Alexandra David-Néel, who was passing through Bengal before her exploration of Ladakh and Tibet. Alexandra David-Néel made herself famous for spending years in Buddhist monasteries, writing letters to her husband, who would have then been published in France, and she vulgarized Buddhism and Eastern concepts to the West, participating even to a fad, a craze in Paris, for anything coming from Tibet, Nepal, or northern India. Well, in March 1912, in Calcutta, she wrote several letters of recommendation that Tagore could have handed to publishers and editors, including the owner of the newspaper Progrès de Lyon and Alfred Valette, who was the director of Mercure de France. This French review, Mercure de France, was a pioneer in terms of English-speaking literature. The best translator of the time from English to French was someone called Henri de Davray, and he was working for that review. Valette had a wife, Rachilde, who was a writer and a leading figure in the literary circles and the Parisian circles. She was very close to David-Néel. Well, you would think this is not important, maybe, but initially, Tagore had planned to set sail for Europe on March the 16th of 1912. He postponed his departure for medical reasons. Because of these letters, we can assume that if he had left in March, reaching Marseille, he might have stepped over in Lyon and Paris before going to London. Of course, you know what happened in London. He met William Butler Yeats, Ezra Pound, and all these key figures, and it took him less than 14 or 15 months to receive the Nobel Prize. But let's think a little bit of this possibility that he might have stepped in Paris for a while before going to London, and the history would have been completely different. So this sickness and postponement were blessings in disguise. During his convalescence in the spring of 1912, Tagore started to translate his poems included in several collections, including Gitanjali. He continued his work during his crossing from Mumbai to Marseille. You know that in London, there was this story with William Rosenstein and William Butler Yeats. What is less known to you, perhaps, is that William Butler Yeats was then in love with an 18-year-old French-Irish beauty, Iseult, who was Maud Gonne's daughter. And he would propose to her 3 years later. The demoiselle had become so fond of Tagore's poetry that she took Bengali lessons. She wanted to translate The Gardener in French from the original. Thus, Yeats' interest in Tagore was partly driven by this affection. Maybe he would have put less energy in promoting Tagore's work if Iseult, that French girl, had not, because she was half Irish and half French, should have said that earlier, had not been besides him. Indeed, they spent their summers between 1911 and 1918 together at Les Mouettes, a house by the sea in Normandy, where Isolde was used to dancing at dusk at the edge of the waves on the seashore in a freestyle. Some years ago, I drew a parallel between Yeats to a child dancing in the wind and Tagore's poem On the Seashore, poem number 60 of Gitanjali, for those who do not know. I invite you to look at those poems Yeats wrote at the time, and perhaps you will find, like I did, some similarities with Tagore's Gitanjali. Now, in October 1912, it so happened that the 22-year-old poet Saint John Perse, who would become a Nobel Prize for Literature, was studying in London. By chance, he read Tagore's poems, the poems that Yeats had made published in the Times. Seized by their originality, simplicity, and sincerity, he asked for an appointment with Tagore. During their meeting, he recommended André Gide as an exclusive translator. Gide, another future Nobel Prize, was then the main editor of La Nouvelle Revue Française. This review gave birth to Gallimard. Gallimard is the main editor, French editor, and also my editor, by the way. So maybe if you want to have a look at the book, you can. Since his recent publication of The Immoralist, Gide had been seen as the spearhead of nonconformism in French literature. Thanks to Saint John Perse and another influential poet, Valéry Larbaud, Gide became Tagore's translator, an exclusive translator. He also wrote the introduction to Gitanjali in French. Here is an extract from a letter sent by Saint John Perse to Gide when he heard that the rights were given to the latter. I never doubted that by reaching Tagore himself, everything would work in your favor. So I must thank you very much for having informed me in time of his return to London. When I saw Tagore, ignorant not only of French literature, but of our language itself, he suddenly asked me, not as a proper advice, but according to me, absolutely, to point out to him some French names. I left him on a piece of paper your name and that of Claudel. Well, Paul Claudel is a very, very famous poet in France as well. In fact, Gide was not the first person to translate Tagore in France. A young Paul, a Polish man, Jean H. de Rosen, and Henri de Davray, who was working for Mercure de France, and who was the translator of Joseph Conrad, Wells, and Oscar Wilde, had started the work and introduced Tagore in their respective reviews. Indeed, in the Revue des Revues of April 14, 1913, 14 translations of some offerings by de Rosen were published, and on August 16, 53 poems were released in Mercure de France, accompanied by an article, A Mystical Hindu Poet, Rabindranath Tagore. So, just to put it briefly, Gide was the most famous translator of Tagore, but he was not the first one. And the reputation of Tagore was anterior to the Nobel Prize. Okay, that did not come in literary circle as a surprise. It was a little bit prepared. So Tagore, you know this, returned to Shantiniketan after a sensational tour of the United States, and on November the 13th, 1913, he learned, to his great surprise, that he had won the Nobel Prize. L'Offrande lyrique, translated and prefaced by Gide, was published in the NRF in December. Here is what Gide wrote 18 years after. Rabindranath Tagore still had very few readers in England when I translated his Gitanjali in 1912. The incomparable poetic purity of this little book shone very brightly to my eyes, and I was honored to bring a reflection of it to France. Through the war, above our political and confessional dissensions, this fixed star continued to shine and to shed on the world a tranquil light of love, trust, and peace. This is a kind of interesting summary because obviously this was how Tagore's role was perceived for many, many years as a mystical poet, as a poet, and then we will see that Tagore would come to be known as a social thinker. In France, the Great War, which of course started in 1914 and finished in 1918, put an halt to a promising process of translations and publications. Interest in Tagore and what he promoted, a better harmony between the East and the West, greater social and gender equality, more respect for nature, etc., declined quite sharply. So many French people took refuge in blind nationalism. Whatever was not national was seen as potentially dangerous. French neighbors did the same. The rise of xenophobic and fascist ideas that slowly spread through Germany, Italy, Spain, and brought Second World War was visible also in France. You had nationalists on the one hand and some intellectuals who kept faith in the independence of the mind and universal humanism on the other hand. Indeed, it was during that war, which took so many lives, including Indian soldiers sent to the French front, that two intellectuals, Jean Guéhenno and Romain Rolland, found out how much Tagore was socially and politically engaged. They did so although little information was circulating on Tagore. They had access to his writings through English. Right now, I'm completing a book on Guéhenno, this intellectual, a French intellectual and literary critic who finished his life as an academician. And he participated to Tagore's 100th birthday seminar organized in Delhi. So of course, in 1961. And when he was asked by Jawaharlal Nehru to sum up this 4-day seminar to him, he wrote 2 gigantic articles in September 1919 and October 1921 that are precise and precious analyses of the geographical situation at the time and great interpretations of Tagore's work, including Guy Rebari. This is important. This might be the first time this name, Jean Guéhenno, is pronounced in Bengal. Everybody knows about Romain Rolland because the connection has been promoted greatly, but nobody knows about this intellectual. But he was certainly one of the first ones and probably the deeper eye who analyzed Tagore. So I will soon release a book on it, and you will have a clear idea of how French people and French intellectuals perceived Tagore at the time. Now, talking about Romain Rolland, who is far famous in India, he was, of course, Tagore's friend and was an acquaintance of Gandhi, Nehru, Subhas Bose, C.F. Andrews, whose portrait is below, William, W. Pearson, also Jagadish Chandra Bose, Kalidash Nag, etc. So Romain Rolland started writing about India in 1915, the year he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, another Nobel Prize. I think that is already 4 Nobel Prizes around Tagore. And just in 1915, in fact, Romain Rolland was a successor of Tagore because in 1914, because of war, there was no Nobel Prize granted. Like Guéhenno, Roland discovered Tagore not so much through Gitanjali, but through his anti-imperialist and anti-nationalist message of India to Japan. This lecture to Japan was later included in Nationalism and was published alongside Romain Rolland's Au peuple assassiné, to the assassinated peoples, in April 1917. It echoed his call to stand above the fray and to support peace, a better understanding between all the peoples, and initiatives where the whole world becomes a nest, which is Visva-Bharati's motto. For the anecdote, it was in Japan in January 1917 that Tagore met Paul Richard and Mira Richard, his wife. Years later, Mira Richard got divorced from that French person and would become Sri Aurobindo's collaborator, the well-known mother. And Paul Richard worked here in Shantiniketan during the 1920s as a French teacher. You can see them on the picture here, by the way. From June 1920 to July 21, Tagore undertook a tour of Europe and the US, beginning in England. England was a disappointment. Many of his former imperfect encounters had taken distance from him. They failed to understand why Tagore had renounced his knighthood following the Amritsar massacre, although it was obvious that it symbolized the exasperation of the people against the violence and the impunity of the British soldiers. After 2 months in England, instead of going to Sweden and to receive the Nobel Prize in person, Tagore arrived in Paris on August the 6th, 1920. He was initially taken in by a member of the Indian community, Sudhir Rudra, the son of the principal of St. Stephen's College of Delhi. I had to mention St. Stephen's because I once taught there. Then he was pleasantly surprised to find people receptive to Visva-Bharati's principles and project. Thanks to Albert Kahn, who was a very wealthy banker and a patron of the arts, and the founder of the Autour du Monde Association, France took notice of his presence and of the high potential for better collaboration between the East and the West through Visva-Bharati. Autour du Monde, it's just anecdotal, but it was a really nice place with a garden, a Japanese garden, but it was also a place where you had a photograph studio. So some of the first colored pictures of Tagore were taken from there. So on this slide, you can see not only Tagore, but also other members of the Tagore family, and also Mahalanobis, who was a teacher, mathematics teacher. And if I remember, Jagadish Chandra Bose is here as well. Okay, so this was the place to be. When your Indian community would go to Paris, they would often go and see Albert Kahn. During Tagore's 2-week stay in Boulogne-sur-Seine near Paris, André and Suzanne Carpeles visited him on a daily basis. Those two sisters were admirers of Goginendranath and Abanindranath's works, whom they had known in India, where they used to live. A painter herself, André Carpeles, took the opportunity to draw Tagore's portrait. This portrait is now in Rabindra Bhavan. It was given to Tagore by André Carpelès when she came to Calabavan, because she taught there for 1 year. Okay, this is what she was doing, by the way. You can see on this slide the books that she edited with the Alpanas, all this. She was really influenced by Abanindranath, but was also really close to Rabindranath. On the right-hand side, you've got Suzanne Carpelès, and those who, for several reasons, go to Pondicherry and maybe to Auroville and to the Sri Aurobindo's ashram would know about Suzanne Carpelès because she was a famous Orientalist and Indianist, and she ended her life there teaching French to Indian people. I have no time to show you this movie, but it's really easy to access to. If you just write the name Albert Kahn Tagore, you will find this movie. It's a 5-minute movie where you've got Tagore in the gardens of Albert Kahn, and also you've got Tagore's arriving at Le Bourget airport, and also some nice pictures of Tagore and Nandita at the south of France. So, of course, the slide is not now here, but yes, now you've got it. So this is how it looks like. If you're interested in the link, I will give it to you in a moment. Very, very interesting. Okay. Well, I'll leave it like this because the quotation I'm going to show you is a bit weird. So the Carpelès sisters had a friend, a Russian aristocrat in exile who was Victor Golubiu. And Victor Golubiu took Tagore by the hand, if you want, to visit the Musée Guimet. The Musée Guimet is a place you have to visit if you go to Paris. It's the Asian Arts Museum. And it's full of beautiful arts that are slowly going back to India, by the way. Gandhara art and beautiful sculptures. Tagore also attended a performance at the opera of Faust by Charles Gounod. And he said that this was the first and probably the only time he enjoyed the opera. He did not like that much the classical music with the big orchestras, but he enjoyed that one. He also met an economist called Charles Rist and the Indologist Sylvain Lévy. And Sylvain Lévy and his wife Désirée, who came here in 1921. I'll go back to this in a moment. He also met the philosopher Henri Bergson. Henri Bergson, who would become a Nobel Prize, 5th Nobel Prize. Their meeting was quite encouraging, but Bergson was vexed that their discussion was released by the press without his agreement. He was so resentful that 10 years after, he wrote this during, well, he said this during an interview. So Mr. Masson was an Indologist. Mr. Masson is going to India to investigate Eastern religions. Okay, this is Bergson speaking, okay, this great philosopher. I doubt he'll bring back much. I have seen some of the Eastern wise men, including Rabindranath Tagore. They are high spirits, but talking philosophy with them, I realized that there was not much to learn from them, and that their knowledge is quite superficial. Their wisdom does not go very far. The Eastern wise men like to contrast their spiritual civilization with our material civilization, but they know only one aspect of our civilization and ignore the other, the more profound one. Okay, now I let you appreciate Bergson's superiority complex, which was quite the norm among the European philosophers at the time, including Gide and Claudel, whom I quoted before. My book on Jean Guéhenno is stressing this fact that, you know, this notion of Orientalism is very important and is pregnant at the time when Tagore was present. And it's essential that Tagore was present because he was breaking these notions. Sometimes it was not at the first time. Maybe it was just infused in the French minds. It took a lot of time, but that was part of the process. Back to 1920. Tagore, in 1920, visited the battlefields in Champagne. Champagne is not only a place where you have this wonderful sparkling wine, right? In 1914, it was a disaster. When I say disaster, nothing was left, okay? It was a devastation. One city is called Rennes in Champagne. So in Rennes, he stayed still for a while and was said to burst into tears in front of the ruined cathedral of Reims. If you want to know more about this passage and about this angel, the smiling angel that you can see here, feel free to ask at the end, because this was very emotional, and this has been taken over by the press. The French press was surprised that a Nobel Prize could cry in front of a Christian building first, and especially at that place where you had that specific angel. What was this angel? In fact, as you can see on the slides, the cathedral was completely bombed out. And that statue of the smiling angel was a symbol of rejoicing. And it was completely broken into pieces, torn into pieces. So what happened? It's more like the French cathedral, you know, Notre Dame, which has been just under fire recently and has been rebuilt. Well, this is exactly the same story. This little angel representing hope, torn into pieces because of the bombs, had been repaired by craftsmen. It took them several years to repair it, and now it's standing at the very same place, and the whole building is at the very same place. It's symbolical, and it's something like, you know, a phoenix attitude, like to get born again from ashes. Back in Boulogne, so Boulogne is really close to Paris. When you know Roland Garros, the tennis court, it's in Boulogne. When you watch the football matches of Paris Saint-Germain, it's in Boulogne. So it's very, very close. Back in Boulogne, Tagore met Gide, Roland, and the poetess of Romanian origins, Comtesse de Noailles, who described their encounters 10 years later in a catalogue of Galerie Pigalle. I'll come back to this. After giving lectures in Holland and in Belgium, where he caused a tremendous sensation, Tagore spent another 2 weeks at Autour du Monde in Boulogne in October 1920. And then he left for the United States and had a stopover in England, and he flew to Paris, landing at the Bourget airport. See this slide, it will take a little time. But that was the first time that Tagore took an airplane. And of course, it's difficult from where you are situated, but this is a caricature by Gauguin-Dronat of his uncle. Because he was, and Gauguin-Dronat said, it was like a caption, this was the first trip of Rabindranath of that kind. It was the first trip of that kind of Rabindranath, saying, well, of course, he has been traveling in a different way. His stay in Paris lasted from April the 16th to the 7th to the 27th, 1921. There he met again with Romain Rolland. And here is a quotation from Romain Rolland's diary. Tagore speaks only English. My sister helps as an interpreter. He looks a bit like a magician. Fortunately, his manners are simple and courteous, and everything he says is friendly and spontaneous. He stays for an hour and a half and talks a lot with a pleased and intelligent ease, often using imaginary forms. These were the first meetings between Romain Rolland and Tagore. And the correspondence that they had is voluminous, and their friendship lasted for many, many years. So if you want to ask me questions about this relationship between Romain Rolland and Tagore, feel free at the end. Tagore also met the Scottish sociologist and landscape planner Patrick Geddes. Patrick Geddes is quite important as well for students. In fact, he revolutionized the campuses, how to manage campuses such as campuses in Paris, in England. And he had that vision that there should be some free spaces. And it's interesting to know that Patrick Geddes' son came in Shantiniketan and studied in Shantiniketan in 1921. He carried out a survey on the villages in Bolpur, okay, all the mud houses, and this was his PhD thesis, Arthur Geddes' work. In this very library, since you've got the PhD thesis, you should find it, okay? In Paris, Tagore gave another lecture on the bowels. You would be surprised that Tagore did not tackle subjects too much political subjects, but the bowl or the message of the forest. Okay, these were the titles of the conferences. Well, we could say that at that time that was not political. The bowl, the message of the forest. Well, think now, 21st century. We're in the 21st century and the environment is certainly our priority. Okay? He's dealing with this in 1921. That's the reason why now studies in France are really trying to see everything which is linked to ecology, environment in Tagore's works. It's like proto-ecology or environmental studies. Proto means before. Of course, we cannot really say that Tagore is the first environmentalist, so to speak, but why not? You know, the notion did not exist at the time, but he was already thinking about it. Well, this is what he talked about when he came to Paris. He also went to Strasbourg. Some of you have heard of Strasbourg because it's one of the capitals of Europe. It's on the border with Germany, okay? It's in Alsace, which used to be in Germany, by the way. Strasbourg has got a very strange history. Before, at the end of the war, it went back to France, but before that, it was in Germany. So what happened in Strasbourg? A bit of history. Because it was taken over by the French, the French decided to put a lot of money in the University of Strasbourg. So all the great Parisian teachers, professors, went from Paris to Strasbourg for 2 or 3 years to show to the Germans that, yes, we have a great education. We can teach philosophy like you do, because the Germans have got quite a high reputation in philosophy. So Sylvain Lévy was first a professor in Paris, but also in Strasbourg. So when Tagore went to Paris, he followed Sylvain Lévy and went to Strasbourg and talked to the students there. And then he went to Darmstadt. Maybe you've heard about that Tagore week in Darmstadt, where Tagore was received as an ambassador. But when I say an ambassador, it's like 10,000 people going to his meetings, a complete craze, right? So there was a kind of diplomatic war between Germany and France on the name of Tagore at that time, in 1920-21. It was like trying to get the support of Tagore for political reasons. And in exchange, France and Germany and England as well, and other countries would give fundings to Visva-Bharati. Yeah, in 1921, Tagore went, or 20 and 21, Tagore also went to Europe to collect money, because otherwise he would have difficulties in founding and funding this establishment. And when he went to these places, rich people would give him money. Sometimes he would have partnerships with French governments or institutions. Tagore returned to India after in 1921. But as I said, he spent some days before in the south of France. He didn't go directly from Paris to Mumbai and then Calcutta. No, he stepped over at Cap Martin, this villa which you can see. And maybe you don't know the woman on the picture, but that lady is one of the greatest feminist artists and writers of the time. Her name is Marguerite Yourcenar. Marguerite Yourcenar is with Marguerite Duras, Françoise Sagan, those key figures who have revolutionized, completely revolutionized, emancipated the French literature and the arts and the way people see France today. Well, Marguerite Yourcenar was only 18 years old when she sent that letter on the right-hand side of the slide, which is blue paper, and she sent it to Tagore, and it's there at Rabindra Bhavan. In this letter, she says her admiration for the poet and how it influenced her and gave her the energy to forward. Marguerite Yourcenar was living in the south of France at that time, in Monte Carlo, which is, of course, Monaco. So really close to Cap Martin. So only a few kilometers from there. They probably did not meet, but there was this emulation around Tagore in the south of France at that time. I had this nice conversation yesterday with someone who was questioning himself about how come French artists in 1930, well, I'm taking a bit of advance here, how come the French artists in 1930 didn't react to Tagore's paintings? We've got some comments by some writers, but no artists. How come, Fabien? Chuchubana Adekari, he asked me. And I said to him, hey, just mind that all these artists, in May, they are not in Paris. They are going south to get the inspiration, or they're going to Brittany because there are nice models, nice things to do and to say. The weather is nice. So there is no one in Paris when Tagore goes to Paris in 1930. Well, I'm taking a bit of advance, but it's something to explore here. So in the 1920s, Tagore did not go that often to Europe, or he did, but in Paris, he stepped only for a few days. It's more like French people went to Chantilly-Quétain. So now I'm going to talk about people who came here before me. Okay, so in 1921, of course, you know that Sylvain Lévy came here. And Sylvain Lévy is on several of these pictures. He was present for the inauguration of Visva-Bharati in 1921. He also inaugurated the Tibetan and Chinese department here. His wife, Désirée Lévy, known as Madame Lévy or Didima, wrote a complete diary on her experience. And she did not focus so much on the classes that took place at Visva-Bharati, but how villages and also the ladies, or the wives of the professors, or the girl students lived at that time. So it's very precious. It has been translated, but it's very difficult to find the copy. I've got it in French. We are hesitating in translating it. I think it's interesting. Then, in January 1923, the painter and engraver André Carpellès, whom I talked to you about just before, came in. And so did Fernand Benoit, who was a linguist, a Swiss linguist, and Arthur Guedes, or Arthur Guedes, I mentioned before. Well, I'm really fascinated by André Carpelles, and those who were here last year, you had this nice presentation by Marielle Olivier, who talked to you about this painter. She was not only an engraver and an editor, she also painted very beautiful portraits. Here is one of them. And she had a close connection with Rabindranath Tagore and Roti and Pratima Devi. So you've got at Rabindra Bhavan, you've got a huge collection of letters by André Carpelles. They are not talking about the weather, by the way. They are talking about very important subjects because at one particular moment, they will be dealing with, you know, the fascist event in Italian Mussolini, the episode in 1925-26, because André Carpelles could speak Italian. And she was a friend of Tagore. And she tried to warn him, Robbie, don't go there. They're going to try to manipulate you. But she was refused access to go with them and cross the border, because otherwise she would have translated what Tagore said or what was said in the newspapers, how the words he said were deformed. Okay, so they talked about this. Also, she was very present in 1930 during the exhibition in Paris, though she was sick. And because she was sick, the whole story was turned down. Instead of going towards André Carpelles, Rabindranath went towards Victoria Ocampo. Okay, but the first idea was to go and see André Carpelles so that André Carpelles could organize the exhibition for him. Other visitors, I'll go quite fast here because I'm running late, I think. Mircea Eliade. Mircea Eliade is not French, he's Romanian, but he's, let's say, the father of the history of religions, okay? And of course, in Bengal, you know this story with Maitri, you know, La Nuit Bengali, the Bengali Night, which was a novel, quite scandalous novel. Mircea Eliade wrote a very interesting article when he came to Shantiniketan, which was released in the press and in several books in France. Another very important person who came and visited Shantiniketan, and probably you did not carry out any research. I mean, you Bengali researchers failed to have a close look at this person. His name is Albert Londres. Albert Londres is another father or something, is un grand reporter. Is the father of those reporters who are going throughout the world to go into detail and describe what is going on. After that, it led to a new profession, literally speaking. So when you've got, for example, journalists going to Ukraine or going to Gaza, or they are grand reporters. He was one of the first ones. And he came to Bengal and he went to Calcutta first. And Robbie said to him, because he met him there, and he said, you should go to Shantiniketan to make your opinion. So he wrote like 10 pages about Shantiniketan and released it in the very famous newspaper, which is here, called Excelsior. I'm not going to give you the other names, it's okay, except this one, because this is something I'm going to, maybe my next visit will be linked to this, next visit to Shantiniketan. On the left-hand side, left top corner, you've got two people, Alain Danilou, who used to work at Sangeet Bhavan, okay? At Sangeet Bhavan, and because he was a dancer as well, besides being a musician, he also was at Kala Bhavan, Sangeet Bhavan, and he would go like this. And Raymond Burnier, who was a photographer. All those photos that you have here are taken by Raymond Burnier, and they are, I've got the exhibition with me, so I can bring it here. It's very precious because you've got photographs of Mandal-Albos, of the students there at the time, the buildings, and beautiful pictures. And the last person I'm going to quote probably is Christine Bosnek, who was here during the late 1930s, during the last years of the poet, and she was running the girls' dormitory. Okay, she was responsible for the girls and was really close to Tagore's family. Well, you mentioned Tagore's visit to Ocampo in Argentina. So you've got a slide on it. Why is it linked to France? It's because Ocampo was a Francophile, a French lover, and used French perfectly well. And she even tried to teach French to Tagore in Argentina by reading some of Baudelaire's poems. Charles Baudelaire, as you know, is a great poet. And in vain, Tagore did not like really those poems and was not so much impressed by French. He tried. He had tried already earlier also receiving some lessons by Sylvain Lévy in Chantilly-Quétaine. We've got this report as well. So I'm running late. So I'm going to give you some slides which are quite I'll go through these slides so that you have some notions of how important Tagore was. They were full covers. You see, Minerva is one of those first front page, completely on Tagore in France, especially when he was going south of France. I took those pictures, the two pictures that you're going to see. This was the view that Tagore had when he was in the south of France. I'm sorry, but it's, yeah, here now you have this. There's a beautiful villa and a nice view on the sea. So it was a place where Albert Kahn would have artists come and relax and try to paint. And this is where the whole story about the exhibition in Pigalle, in the Galerie Pigalle in 1930, so in Paris, the paintings of Tagore, some of them you can see on the walls. Well, it all started in the south of France because he met some painters there who gave their opinion to him. Should I or should I not exhibit these paintings? And some painters were quite negative, and at least two of them were really positive. And that was, of course, Victoria Ocampo, because she came all the way from Paris and to see those paintings. And she said, you have to do it. Really, I'm organizing it for you. And she did it all. And also you have other painters who paid attention to. So you had this exhibition in 1930, a nice coverage as well. Several people coming, poets. One of the poets was Valéry, Paul Valéry, a very famous poet. Anna de Noailles, who wrote the catalogue. You would not, if you go to Paris one day and you feel like going to the place where there was this exhibition, you won't find it. It no longer exists. Okay, Galerie Pigalle, nobody will know it. But it had, for a while, it was the place to be. It was the place to be, especially for new material. The exhibition before Tagore was on what we called Negro art. So that means Africa. That meant at the time, Negro was not a nasty word. Well, it was, but you know how it goes. So you had this African art going on, and it became a craze. So that was a nice place because it was exotic, but at the same time, very serious. Just one information also, when Tagore went to Paris, he had an interview at the radio. So he gave his message for peace, which was broadcast all over the world. It was only a 3-minute talk, even 1.5 talk, which you can find on the internet. And it was taken just after the Galerie Pigalle exhibition, taken from the French radio. I'm going to finish with this because otherwise there will be no time with the questions. But before I finish, I always do this. I'm going to give you my respect because I'm not the first specialist on Tagore ever. And there is still one person who is very, very an expert really on Tagore's work. And her name is France Chartier. France Chartier is now very old and she cannot go to Calcutta, but she lived in Shantiniketan for several years and also did a great job as a translator. And she translated many, many books of Tagore directly from Bangla to French. These are at the bottom here, okay? So you've got Kabuliwala, you've got like Charulata or Nashtanier, of course. So my respect to her. And this will be it. Just before I finish, I show you some of the covers of the books of Tagore, just to see how impressive it is in French. You've got all these books which were released through decades and decades. Now Tagore is far less important in France. It's kind of emergency to reactivate this, but it's not impossible, you know, and we have got to remain optimistic as well for this. It's just another one. Okay, well, this is it. Thank you very much. Of course, if you have any questions, I can answer them.
Hello. Time is very short only. We can buy 2 questions. Pinpoint questions, no discussion or elaboration. Only pinpoint 2 questions we can invite. We have another meeting also. Please. Okay. First of all, I would request to our student. From a student side, if any question. Any question from the student side? If not, from our faculty members or audience, please.
Fabien, I have one question.
Yeah, sure. You would.
First thing that as every time I say after your presentation, I learn new things about Tagore. So I have learned new things about Tagore now also. So I'm asking one question from that. Regarding Patrick Geddes. So you said that he revolutionized the student campuses across France, mainly in France, I think. So do you think this idea he got from the campus of Shantiniketan, or was it his original idea?
I mean, they had a huge correspondence, Tagore and Patrick Geddes. In fact, in Edinburgh, in Scotland, you've got a center of Tagore called Scott, and it's Bashabi Fraser, who's a famous scholar on Tagore studies, who is the head of that research laboratory. And to answer your question, she's analyzing this correspondence because it's not an individualist work. For example, you had also in Sriniketan, you had Helmiast working hand in hand with Tagore. So you had all these people thinking about how, in terms of urban planning, things could be improved. I've been to GNU, for example. I've been to Pondicherry. I've been to all the campuses in India. And you can see how large and vast it is, like here in Shantiniketan. It's not as if you had to build a small pocket in a city. It's more like taking advantage of nature and having students, like the Topavanas, like keeping an eye on nature and having this, you know, idea of working hand in hands with them. So Geddes had this vision. he did not spread his ideas throughout of France. There were several experimentations, one in Paris and one in Montpellier. They had a building built there, which was called, two buildings built. One is called le Collège des Écossais, so word for word as the Scottish College, and the Indian College. And the Indian College was inaugurated in 1932, and for the inauguration, Tagore sent a letter to Patrick Geddes, and that for the inauguration, Tagore virtually, because Tagore couldn't go there, opened that session for that very building in 1932. It still exists, but it's under construction. 1932, and one of the first students who went there is Raja Rao, the writer. You've got like 6 students, a batch of 6 students going there for like 5-6 years. And then also because it depends on the teachers, they tend to go back to Paris. Studies are more in Paris. But for 5 or 6 years, the Indian students, they go there. Now, going back to the idea of spreading nature or spreading intellectual studies in nature or in hand, yeah, Geddes was definitely into it. I'm saying he's a pioneer. He might not be the first one, but he popularized it, definitely, and internationalized it, because he was asked also in Israel. He went to Tel Aviv to build this. He went to Scotland. He went to Scotland. You've got those massive campuses as well. So he was here and there, and he had these conversations with stuff.
So is there any question more, or otherwise I will stop here? Very short pinpoint and short answer will also.
M. Manson mentioned that, like he says that Rabindranath knowledge is like, it's kind of superficial. He said that.
Bergson,
In
yeah.
which way he said, by the way? I just saw. I'm asking.
So it's Bergson's opinion, and I said just after, I said Bergson was not the only one to think that. Okay, I'm sorry to say that on the name of all the Western people of the time, but I'm not responsible for the stupidity of the Western people. Okay, but it is true that at the time, quite systematically, there is a phenomenon which is studied, by the way, in my thesis. When you look at Gide, when you look at Yeats, when you look at Pasternak, when you look at Bergson, you look at Ezra Pound, or even George Bernard Shaw, you have a fascination for Tagore, which lasts sometimes more than this, but a few years, let's say. And it's a fascination, a revelation, and they dive into Tagore, okay? I'm sure it's a psychological phenomenon. They dive into it. They find like, wow, incredible. It's a new thing, really modern, something never before I've felt, because it's emotion. It's something like, okay, rationality, emotion, mixed. And after a time, they just take some distance, and they do not have that appeal any longer. And they even have this kind of attitude of criticizing their own previous attitudes for having had this attraction for the East, because they want rationality. They need rationality to such a point that they give up that possibility of getting more emotion, first thing, or just because Tagore is not only emotion, but just having contradictory opinions. And this is something I've studied, less in Bergson. In Bergson's case, it's quite interesting because he's the head of one current of philosophy, and it's called well, spiritualism, but it's Western spiritualism. He calls this spiritualism, and Western spiritualism is based on humanism. And this is the whole point. Europe is based on humanism, on the Enlightenment. But what is humanism? You may think that Tagore is a humanist. I don't think so. Maybe you're going to say, wow, how shocking. No, he's not a humanist. Why? First thing, humanism is based on man. Man is the center of the world. If we take the definition of humanism. So it's anthropocentric, okay, based or ethnocentric, based on man. This is not at all Tagore's thought. Tagore is including nature into the paradigm, okay? To such an extent that Tagore is only part of it, Atma and Brahma, okay? But for Western minds, especially bred by this anthropological point of view of man at the center, and also Eurocentric, because it comes from Europe, humanism, enlightenment comes from Europe, it's impossible, there is a glass ceiling. Okay, they cannot go beyond. They can't understand that, no, man is only part of the system, and man has to preserve the earth. Okay, so I think that the break or the breach between those philosophers who at one point were attracted with Tagore in their own analysis, and it's very surprising when they try to analyze Tagore's thought, it's pretty good, and all of a sudden they are missing the point completely. I'm telling you frankly, plenty of French authors, but also British writers, they would understand Tagore to a certain point, and then man comes back. Tagore is putting man at the center again, and it's more than this. It's the power of man.
So really, thank you
Yeah.
so much. Please.
Thank
be
you so
seated
much.
here.
Okay.
We are so fortunate to you, really, for your deliberation, and really, I am personally benefited from your lecture, through your lecture, and there are many parts which I have encompassed. That's really motivated me to understand, and I am so proud for your deliberation as well as for poet Rabindranath Tagore. How broad-minded Tagore, but in some aspects, I beg to differ with you. Related to that, Tagore was not humanist. There is a book related to Tagore's humanism also. Oh, but not in just Western aspect of humanism. There is anthropocentrism in the European aspect. But in Indian, related to spirituality, does not mean that only confined to a particular periphery. That means where man is not only the center of it, but at the same time, there are two types of anthropocentrism. One is deeper level of anthropocentrism and shallow level of anthropocentrism. The shallow level of anthropocentrism is basically confined to man only.
Okay.
But the deeper, even in ecology, deep ecology and shallow ecology. So in a deeper level, if you think that you are also right in this aspect, that Tagore was much intended to understand human being with nature. That's why he established Visva-Bharati.
Exactly.
This is also the nature-based educational system. And really, I'm very thankful for your deliberation, various parts. And I have tried because I had some inquisitiveness to visit France. Last year, I was in Italy.
In Italy.
Good place. For deliver some lectures in La Sapienza University. It's a huge, big university, and more than 5-6 lectures delivered there. That's why I had bound to cancel my trip. Particularly, I was so much fascinated to visit Eiffel Tower. Really. But occasionally I have got at the same time, I have received an invitation from Berlin also. Oh, and in Frankfurt also. Thereafter, I shifted to Vienna.
You're lucky you're
yeah.
going to visit a lot
Yeah,
of places.
but I have not like Tagore. Tagore visited 34 countries. I have visited only 24 countries. So really, I'm very much indebted to you for your deliberation lecture. So on behalf of this university, I thank you. So as a presidential remark, I will only take 1 or 2 minutes. That's you have covered various aspects, and this is also Amol Itla Lete Durui. That's very interesting, and that's related to Postmaster Dagba. And you have mentioned related to Silva Levy. He was visiting professor in 1921. And William Rottenstein, so we also discussed something. And it is very interesting. And that some pictures also related that you have here showed that Prashant Mahalnavis and Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose also. That's their eagerness and related to it. And Patrick Geddes as a sociologist, we have also little studied on it. And Tagore, you have also reminded us that Tagore had delivered lecture on Baul.
On Bao, yeah.
Baul is actually a crazy human being. No, and Tagore also, when 1930, he delivered a Hibbert lecture in London.
In London.
He also mentioned several times concerning Baul. And Tagore was very much influenced by Baul and Sufi songs. Do you know Sufi?
Yeah, exactly.
Sufi songs. There are many songs he composed. Some songs like Amar Praner Manush Ache Prane, Tai Heri Tai, Takol Khane. There is another Maze Baul Bajaire, Baje Baul Baje. And Tui Fele Esechis Kare. There is another very famous song, Ami Kothai Pavotare, Amar Moner Manush. Amar Praner Manush Ache Prane and Moner Manush, but these terms are keenly related to Baul song. That's the super human being, super natural entity that who is not outside of nature. That is the humanism of Tagore's, who resides within me.
I get it, but
Yes,
yeah,
that's
agree with
what
you.
I heard.
Yeah, but it's
It is very interesting, and Tagore has that means he resides within me. That's a moner manus, nothing outside it. This is so really, I am very thankful to you, highly thankful to our Nimaida and to all colleagues of the Center for Modern European Languages, Literature and Culture Studies and their students. Really, I am thankful for your patient hearing. So now over to our
Thank you, sir. After the presidential remarks, I would request Professor Nilanjan Chakraborty to propose the vote of thanks.
Although I think in a way the vote of thanks have already been proposed by the honorable chairperson of this session. It is customary, of course, but I would express my profound gratitude to Dr. Fabien Chartier, our dear Fabien, who is with us, for last 2 weeks in Shantiniketan, conducting workshops with the students. And today's lecture, in a sense, is a kind of, a culminating point of what he has been doing throughout these, 2 weeks of intensive, close reading of the text, which is getting translated and which will be published very shortly. And of course, added to that, his research findings, which are of such big relevance. And, when someone does his research at this, in a cultural sort of, in a context which denotes that cultural relationships between two civilizations. There are many new things which come out, and I think Fabien has thrown light on those new dimensions and new paradigm and new criteria with which we can look at Tagore. I would like to express my deepest thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Prabir Kumar Ghosh, who already, although, could not be present today, but who remains an inspiration for all of us. And I would, of course, extend my deepest gratitude to today's president of the session, Professor Sirajul Islam, who has made very extremely interesting comments and supplemented in a way, what Fabien had to say. And I'm, sir, really thankful to you for your comments. I am grateful to the Library Authority and particularly to the librarian, Dr. Nimai Chand Shaha, for meticulously arranging this session. And Dr. Shaha always, remains forthcoming in extending all kinds of helps when this kind of academic meets take place. Thankful to him. I'm also thankful to other staff of the library. I'm thankful to my colleague, Dr. Nipun Nutan, who has been steadfastly maintaining, contacts with Fabien and make this, program a great success. I am thankful to my other colleagues of CIMELS who have extended all kinds of helps and cooperation. I am thankful to my office staff, who has been doing all the arduous paperworks. And lastly, I am greatly thankful, how many times I don't know, to my dear students, who are present and who has made this session extremely successful and who has been very arduously, diligently, undergoing this training, which Fabien is imparting. And I believe that all these, arduous work will yield very good results, very good positive results in the form of publications, of Tagore, and then probably the enactment in India and abroad. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture session. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you all.
Thank you. Merci.
Suddenly, you might have